Now, First Lady Melania Trump is now denying ties to Jeffrey Epstein and knowledge of his sex crimes, saying Thursday that the stories are completely false and calling accusations that she was somehow involved smears about me. That's a direct quote. Reading an extraordinary statement at the White House, Melania Trump said she and her attorneys were fighting back against unfounded and baseless lies in regards to her connections to the late financier, a convicted sex offender who leveraged connections to the rich, powerful, and famous to recruit his victims and cover up his crimes. Want to bring up a social media post courtesy of Fox News in which they quote First Lady Melania Trump in that press conference that she held earlier this week. It says here, breaking, quote, "I have never had any knowledge of Epstein, abuse of his victims. I was never involved in any capacity. I was not a participant. I was never on Epstein's plane and never visited his private island." That is a direct quote from First Lady Melania Trump. Now, a lot of questions have arisen because of this press conference, which seemed pretty impromptu to many people who were there and who heard it live. Joining us next to discuss possibly some of the implications from this and also where this Epstein investigation stands and how this press conference has possibly propelled it forward is Sherry Carney. She is a civil rights attorney and she is also an advocate for survivors of abuse. Sherry, good morning. Good to have you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I just want to start with the basics here because, as I mentioned, now a lot of questions are being asked by reporters, people are covering the story. From a legal standpoint, what could be the purpose for First Lady Melania Trump to host a press conference just to reiterate the fact that she had no ties to Jeffrey Epstein?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a wild story because she had a purpose, but we don't know what that purpose was. And what it did was it reactivated the frustration of the public and also the survivors of still no accountability, no justice. I'm surprised and in some respects delighted that the First Lady stepped forward and has made a comment about this. She did talk about survivors, supporting survivors, and I support her for saying that. I guess my question is, if she really supports survivors, why isn't she telling her husband to just release all the files, only redacted as to survivors' names and identities? We could solve this really quickly. It's surprising to me that she preemptively said that she doesn't know Epstein, she had no relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, and there are emails. There's one in particular from 2002 where she writes, and I'll read this, it says, "Dear G, how are you? Nice story about Jeffrey Epstein, J.E., in New York Magazine. You look great on the picture. I know you were very busy flying all over the world. How was Palm Beach? I cannot wait to go down. Give me a call when you're back in New York. Have a great time. Love, Melania." It doesn't seem like she had no relationship in 2002. So I don't know if something is coming down the pike and she's preemptively striking at this. I do know that this had a tremendous impact on survivors and on the cases.
And see, so that's what's interesting, Sherry, because I've heard similar reports to what you have just echoed, which is it kind of brought it back into the spotlight. Lately, a lot of the major headlines that we have been following having to do with the escalating tensions in the Middle East and the war with Iran. Now, of course, this Epstein investigation, it continues to be a major story. Before we talk about where this could go next, I just want to ask you personally, as someone who's been following this very closely, what has been maybe the most surprising thing you've seen with the way that this entire investigation has been handled, and specifically by the Department of Justice?
It's very frustrating and in some respects heartbreaking, because the Department of Justice from the beginning has tried to shut the whole investigation down. The survivors have been fighting and fighting, telling their stories, being very truthful, being very clear about what happened, when it happened. And so the Department of Justice has basically been in full throttle denial. They've released half of the Epstein files. There's still 3 million files that need to be released. They've redacted the names and the pictures of the accused perpetrators and revealed the identity of the victims. which is against the Epstein Transparency Act, passed by Congress and signed by the President of the United States. And it's made survivors feel that they're just trying to put it in the rearview mirror. But what is missing for survivors is justice, accountability, the accused perpetrators to be investigated. What is missing for me is that I don't understand why there aren't more active prosecutions, active indictments, where there's clear evidence, where there's survivors willing to testify. I do know that there's civil suits. I do know that there's been non-disclosure statements signed, which I'd love to address in a minute. But the Department of Justice has basically turned its back on 1,500 to 2,000 survivors involving the Epstein class of rich, powerful, famous, well-connected men. And most of the rest of us aren't above the law. We don't have these special provisions. These perpetrators, other than the two, Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in prison, and Jeffrey Epstein, who's dead, not a single other accused predator, perpetrator, child molester, child abuser has been held to account. And for a Department of Justice and a First Lady who says she supports survivors, I don't understand, and the survivors I speak to and know don't understand why this silence has been enforced and why the door's been slammed in their face. It's not a happy revelation, and it's for those of us that believe in justice, those of us that believe in the law, are disappointed, to say the least, frustrated, and to some respects infuriated. If it were you or me accused of child abuse or sex trafficking, I don't think that we or anyone we know would be treated this way. And so the Attorney General, Todd Blanche, is trying to shut this investigation down. There's 3 million files that still need to be released. Where is the accountability? If you're a survivor and you've been sex trafficked at 13, 14, and 15 years old, raped, abused, tortured, some reports are even saying some of the victims have been murdered, how would you feel about the Department of Justice slamming the door in your face? And I don't mean to be provocative, but I do mean to carry survivors' messages, which we say we care about, forward in saying they have done their part. When is the Department of Justice going to do their part? This case is not over. It might be, it's not an old story. It's a story that still hasn't been told and resolved.
And that's really the major question that you highlighted throughout that last answer. I think it's the one that's top of mind for most people when you hear reactions online is, why hasn't anybody been held accountable? Especially because we've had all of these files released, so to speak, millions and millions of pages, a lot of them redacted to the general public. But with a lot of those redactions, obviously, the Department of Justice, whoever's looking into it, they know who's attached to all of these correspondence, for example, the people in several of these photos. So, Sherry, is there an answer here as to why there hasn't been more arrests, so to speak?
There is an answer, and the answer is the people accused are powerful, rich, the Epstein class, the cabal of the controlling 1% in this country, and they've been able, through influence, money, campaign contributions, presidential relationships, and many other ways to shut this down. It's not surprising. We're talking about some of the richest, most powerful ruling class in the United States, and they have the power, money, and influence and connections to shut this down. One question I do have, which is there should be and could be state prosecutions, state prosecutors in New York, California, and Florida. And for example, I have worked for the past 15, 20 years expanding statutes of limitations for child sexual abuse, sex trafficking, and child molestation. and pedophilia to extend both civil statutes of limitations and criminal. I believe that what Melania Trump did was open the door to break through some new investigations. And I don't understand. I understand why the Department of Justice isn't prosecuting. They've been shut down by the White House. They've been shut down by Pam Bondi. And now they're getting shut down by Todd Blanche. The FBI's been shut down. So our enforcement agency has basically been closed for business for survivors, not closed for business for the rich, wealthy, and powerful. But the question I have is there are some state statutes of limitations, criminal and definitely civil, that are still available for state prosecutors. I want the prosecutors to put the pedal to the metal and do their jobs. Don't depend on the Department of Justice. They've already told us they're not going to do anything. But in these states, for the laws that we've gotten changed on behalf of survivors, we, as the representatives of survivors and all survivors of child sexual abuse, and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and I feel outraged, and I feel triggered, and I feel re-traumatized by how survivors have broken silence, spoken up, come forward to be re-traumatized, only to have the doors of justice, the courthouse doors, slammed in their face. So I'm now looking to the states, state prosecutors, do your job. Prosecute these individuals, do investigations, issue arrest warrants, issue indictments, get these cases to grand juries. You can do it. You've done it before. Let's get this going. Also, there can be civil cases. Now, some statutes of limitations on the criminal cases are gone. Carell, they're gone. But some of the laws we've changed in the last 20 years, they're not all gone. I worked on a law with the Biden administration to increase Title 18 statutes of limitations, sex trafficking, child sexual abuse, that have been greatly extended. Now, the problem with those is they don't look back. There's no look back window. You don't open up a criminal look back window. You do open up a civil look back window, and the states have it. I don't mean to get too technical, but it is time for justice, and it is time for the American people to demand it, and it's time that the rich and powerful Epstein class aren't above the law, because if they're above the law, there is no law. There is no justice. There's the top tier that can do whatever they want, and then there's the rest of us. And it breaks my heart as a lawyer. It does, because I believe in the system. I believe in justice, and I believe in survivors. And I was friends and had a colleague relationship with the late Virginia Giuffre, and we're very close to the anniversary of her death. And I know that she's looking down, so to speak, and both delighted that the First Lady has addressed this and devastated that the marker hasn't really been moved forward to hold those most accountable. And I also believe that these perpetrators should be called in front of Congress, subpoenaed to testify. Where are the subpoenas? Now, the First Lady addressed survivors being called to Congress to testify. Speaking with survivors, they feel that they have done their part, that it's now up to the authorities and the powers that be. Survivors, of course, should be graciously invited to give testimony to the committees, but they shouldn't be forced. These are women that have been forced to do everything: trafficked, raped, beaten, tortured, sexually abused, victims of pedophilia. I don't think we should force them to do anything else. It's our job, it's our turn, and I would love it if the First Lady took the reins, moved forward with this, and actually supported survivors in getting justice. It looked to me like she was primarily concerned about denying her own liability. It actually reminded me of the statement, and I mean no disparagement, about Melinda Gates. Melinda Gates said she, separated herself from Bill Gates when the Epstein issue surfaced in their marriage. But I don't see any of these women donating to nonprofits that help survivors get justice. I don't see them funding justice actions, a justice defense fund. I don't see actions. And the problem is what we say is right and wrong, and what we believe as a country, and all Americans and good Americans, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you're conservative or liberal or in the middle, we believe that our actions must follow our words. And the words we've heard from the First Lady, from the Department of Justice, from Melinda Gates, from the perpetrators, from the accused, aren't followed up with actions. And I can address what actions I think need to be taken if that's something you are interested in hearing about. I don't want to just, talk about things maybe that you don't want to know yet.
Well, Sherry, we are going to continue to follow this story very closely. This is a live image that we have at the Capitol building over in Washington, D.C. Now, one thing about that press conference and that statement that was issued earlier this week by First Lady Melania Trump is that it did kind of push forth back into the spotlight here, if anything, the major headlines of where this investigation stands. And of course, we know that Attorney General Pam Bondi, she now has been removed as Attorney General. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche has taken that place. So we're going to be looking ahead to this story. As Sherry Carney, civil rights attorney, also an advocate for survivors of abuse, I certainly appreciate your time joining us here today at LiveNOW from Fox, just to really talk about how difficult this is, this entire process for survivors, everyone that is watching this at home, but also talk about how the interest, so to speak, is still there to get to those answers. Now, Sherry, we will be checking in with you soon as we see how all of this progresses. We know that House committees are working to subpoena several of these members here to testify, and we'll be in touch as all of that unfolds.
I just want to say one last thing, is that silence protects predators, accountability protects survivors. Thank you for having me and bringing up this issue. I have a deep respect for the media that's covering this and covering it in a more broad way so that survivors feel heard and we can get justice.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Sherry Carney, civil rights attorney. Again, we appreciate you joining us here as we continue to follow this story. Take care.
You too.